Hi, I'm Kat.
And I'm Mello.
This is Art and Inquiry.
And we're back. More art stuff. But this time, we're going to bring in some words too, not just art. We've got the art of the letter. And I don't mean just going through A, B, C, D. I mean visually, what are letters? How are they shown? How are they used to magnify the message of the words that they are representing? So we're going to explore that. We're going to dive into calligraphy, the whole brush strokes, the OGs before you could actually print stuff, which then brings you to print, typeset. And then we're going to bring it to the digital era where we are now, where we have fonts, letters, everything, everywhere, all the time. Emails, websites, social, they're everywhere. But they aren't all the same. And that's the beauty of it. So if you are listening to this and not watching the video, make sure you drop by our YouTube or Spotify so you can check out the video and see all the visuals. And if not, no problem, because you can actually just click the link in the description and get the whole podcast companion that has all the slides that we run through to help tell our story visually with
You should
letters.
totally do that because they're really pretty too.
Really pretty. I'm just saying. You had two artists work on these slides. This is the best PowerPoint you're about to see.
This goes beyond a PowerPoint. It truly does.
Right?
Okay, so how do you get your meaning across with just a few words on the page? That's the question that we are setting out to answer today. So we're going to focus a little bit, like Mello said, about art and calligraphy, typography, font, style, etc. So first things first, let's do a little bit of a shallow dive into calligraphy. We may do a deep dive later. There's a lot to cover. Oh, and calligraphers, just as an FYI, please don't come for me. I know there's so much to this. I understand that there's so much to this. I really do. But we would have been here for about 10,000 years if I tried to cover absolutely everything. So our focus for today is going to be on Western calligraphy and more modern styles. Okay. The things that sort of correlate fairly significantly through the through line that we're kind of conveying. So let's get into it. First off, what is calligraphy? It's the art of beautiful handwriting. And it uses specialized tools. There are very specific rules for all the different styles, but you can use pens and nibs and brushes and ink to form letters and symbols in an aesthetically pleasing way. It's another aspect of calligraphy that's kind of important is that it's bespoke, it's hand done, and it's continuous. It has a flow. And
it's for like a specific purpose too, right? Like you don't just like randomly write things like this. When I think of calligraphy, I think of like wedding invitations or like old legal documents, when they were done for a specific reason.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I mean, it is definitely an art form. It's something that you practice. There's a lot of it. Like you have to practice over and over again in order to accomplish anything with it. But yeah, it's like you're practicing for the big day. So speaking of this, we'll go on a little bit of a journey throughout time. Like I said, calligraphy has so many roots. I covered it very briefly in these images. It has deep roots in various cultures, intricate hieroglyphs of ancient Egypt to elegant brushstrokes of Chinese calligraphy. Right. Yeah. Awesome.
That's the new version of calligraphy. If you don't know about it, you heard it here first.
If you didn't know about kafluffluffla, what are you even doing here? Okay. If you didn't know about kafluffluffla.
But wait, kafluffluffla is also a new font. So if you don't have this font in if you don't have this in your font book, y'all are missing out.
I'm so glad that they made it into a font. Literally, that's going to make it so much easier because kafluffluffla is so hard. Like you have to practice for so long in order to get it right.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the spacing, it's very difficult. Very difficult. But you
can reproduce it at an 85-degree angle, which is just absolutely insane.
And it's super, super tiny because it's at such an angle.
It is. It's at such an angle. It's so tiny. But in order to get it to look right, I mean, it's just the years of practice. You would be 87 years old before you could master it. So.
If you believe us, I'm sorry.
I'm not at all. Chaos reigns. I'm chaotic neutral. All right.
Oh, I'm chaotic neutral.
Yeah. Or joyful chaotic, maybe. All right, so yeah, so this is like a journey through time. So and we may one day deep dive this, right? Like we may cover every single thing. We may cover calligraphy around the world in someday, but I just want to touch on it briefly. And just because you can't talk about Western calligraphy without also discussing the fact that Eastern, Islamic, all these different types of calligraphy exist. So we're touching on this briefly. If you would like to stop here in the video and take a look at this, I will have some reading and extra links in the companion blog posts that we do for this. But for right now, let's move on to Western calligraphy. So one of the top things that when I was looking at this that I found that people were searching for is like, what's the difference between calligraphy and hand lettering, right? So calligraphy is the art of beautiful writing. It's characterized by multiple styles, but it's a specifically written art form. So in a continuous stroke with various rules. Okay, so it's written, etc. Hand lettering is drawn. So like looking at this, don't compare yourself to others. This is not necessarily, you see how like the COMPAR in the others, etc. That's not how you would write that. That's how you would draw it. So that's the basic difference. So if you're trying to come up with the difference between hand lettering and calligraphy, that's the way to do it. Either are you drawing it or are you writing it? If you're writing it,
Is there such thing as both?
yeah, faux calligraphy, and that will
Hmm.
bring us to, oh, actually, that will not.
Stay
These are
tuned
like,
for more on that.
stay tuned for more on that.
Spoiler.
Bookmark that. I forgot I put the slider in here. So this is kind of like this is from a website called Calligrascape. Say that three times fast.
That's
But this is,
calligraphic, man. That's so
that is
calligraphic.
so calligraphic, Calligrascape. And this is just kind of like a little bit of what you would do with it, like hand letter, like lettering and handwriting, how you would use a pointed pen for some of these, how you would use a brush, how you would use a ruling pen, and how you'd use black letter. And in the presentation that we're going to have in the blog post, you'll be able to link to this and see a lot more about this creator and why they set this up this way. But that I wanted to include this slide just because it has a lot of different options and details and styles and types. So that'll bring us to traditional versus modern calligraphy. So traditional calligraphy is elegant. It has refined letter forms, specific rules, consistent lines and spacing, neutral colors. It's typically associated with a pointed pen or a flat nib. So it's very specific in terms of Western calligraphy, Western traditional calligraphy. It's very specific things. You have all these different like guidelines and rules. When you're learning to do it, you basically do it on this very, very complicated sheet of paper that has these multiple lines, right? And you have to learn exactly the ascenders, you have to learn the angles and things of that nature in order to achieve these kind of traditional neutral designs. Very fancy, but very specific and consistent. So modern calligraphy breaks all the rules, right? So what you probably see a lot more of now in the modern age is modern calligraphy. So you got like a bounced baseline. It's loopy. It's bright colors. It's much more fun and whimsical. It's typically associated with brush pens and digital media stuff like Procreate on
Yeah,
iPads.
if you've ever shopped for Procreate brushes,
Hmm.
you are looking at this right now and you're like, I know that's a brush pack I have. I know
Hmm.
it. Like, because it's used so often on Procreate. And what's really interesting is, knowing that that's actually modern calligraphy, not necessarily the traditional calligraphy in that sense. So when I look at what you have here with the traditional calligraphy, it looks
Hmm.
very structured and almost like rigid, like formal.
It is.
Whereas like modern feels more playful and fun and flowy, and I'm cool to break the rules. Which
Hmm.
okay, I feel that I'm with that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's definitely. I mean, it's definitely evolved. I mean, traditional calligraphy had a very specific point of view, a very specific point. Very oftentimes, it was being used to communicate a legal or important religious text or an important document or something of that nature. It had to be formalized because it needed to be read. People needed to be able to read it. And so they all taught it, it was all taught in a very specific way so that even though as fancy and as flourished as it is, people could still read it. They were used to it. It was all the same. And of course there's different, you know, disciplines of it and different things, but essentially having consistency was still part of the evolution of calligraphy. But yeah, modern calligraphy, this is what we're doing in the modern age. Like that's how we've circled back around. And I think it's pretty cool. I really like modern calligraphy. And then now finally, oh yeah, now finally, that'll bring us to modern and faux calligraphy. Each of these little squares link is going to link to a specific tutorial by a specific creator. This one here is pretty cool because it's how to do it with Crayola markers. I like that one a lot.
Oh. So we're
This
looking at
is
the strokes one that's at the bottom in the
yeah, yeah,
center.
yeah. We're
Oh, that
looking.
makes sense because you have the tip of the marker, you have the
Mhm.
fat side if you lean it.
Yep,
Okay.
yep, yep, and I thought that was really cool. Like, I was like, I never thought of using a child's marker to do calligraphy before, so I had to include it even though, I had to include that. But then so we've got, like, modern calligraphy with a brush pen, we've got this one is gonna link to, like, a basic, like, overview of Procreate along with a bunch of different types of brushes to get started with. This one is faux calligraphy, which is hand lettering that looks like calligraphy. So,
Okay.
yeah, so it's like if you wanna do getting a little bit closer, can I? Yes, I can.
Would you say like a lot of the tattoos that have like writing, are they mostly faux calligraphy? Or the black letter
Sometimes.
looks like kind of too what I've seen with tattoos. That's what this screams to me is like tattoos. I don't know why.
Yeah, no, a lot of tattoo artists study calligraphy. I mean, yeah, technically it would be hand lettering. So as a tattoo, because you're not writing.
Sure.
Yeah, so technically, by a very technical definition, it would be hand lettering. But a lot of tattoo artists study different forms of calligraphy, specifically like the tattoo-based versions of black letter, and some modern script type. I want to say fonts, and it is fonts, but
Mhm.
styles really like scripts.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I mean
Catalyst is
that's
showing
that.
restraint because in an upcoming
Okay.
slide we have what the difference is between some of these words. So we're being very deliberate
I'm
to
I'm
not
really
overlap.
I'm really trying. I'm really trying hard, but I mean, it is they did call. Well, we'll move on because I can't be deliberate for long. I mean, literally, I'm going to use the mic drop thing. Next up, typesetting.
Typesets.
So one thing I found really fascinating while I was researching for this section is how long ago people started trying to reproduce, because like we talked about in the beginning with calligraphy, it's a single one-off bespoke one of a kind item, right? But I didn't realize that woodblock and ink printing and the invention of the printing press were so far back in the past. I genuinely and truly thought it was a lot sooner. So here we have a little very, very, very simplified timeline of prints where all we touched on was like keyframe moments. So there's a lot more to this, but just to cover it a little bit.
We have woodblock printing, ink printing, way back in the day. Like this is before 1000. And then you'll notice we move like takes a decent amount of time before we get into the invention of the printing press. Now this is where things really start to amp up. And you have the actual like movable typeset. This was a big deal, like crazy big deal, because what this unlocked was the ability to basically mass produce and to do it at scale, high volumes. So if you think about when we were talking about calligraphy, each of those documents would have to be handwritten line by line, every single word. That would take forever, whereas when you look at the printing press, to be able to literally just print these pages, even though it's not as fast as what we have today, it was incredibly fast back in the day. So Gutenberg is a name you might have heard before. We'll go into that in just a moment. And the first book that was printed at that scale with mass production. And, a lot of this leads to what you see following. So the lithograph,
Photography.
lithography, these are a lot of
Photography.
graphs. We have calligraphy, topography, if you
Mellography.
mellography, mellographics, a history lesson, Latin lesson, if you can figure out what my name means. The graph, the whole graph piece is writing. That's a big part, or basically inscribing something for lasting. So we have the rotary press, which was 1790, and then you get into offset printing, and this is way more familiar to what we see nowadays. There are more innovations after 1875, of course, but these are those really big pivotal moments that have helped truly define and transition from calligraphy to what we know today as typography, which we'll dive into how those are kind of connected and actually a lot of throwbacks too.
Yeah. So, speaking of the first ever piece of written word here, here's a little bit of the Gutenberg Bible.
Yeah, so background on this, it kind of makes sense. You think about, all right, we have this cool invention, the printing press. What book are we going to print? Well, at the time, what's probably the most popular book? What would most people have in their house? Even though I'm sure there's some poets that would be really sad, it's not their collection of work. It was the Bible that was chosen. So you have Johann Gutenberg. Long story short, they printed the Bible, and what you'll notice is this is actually pictures of the book, which is pretty neat. This looks like it's a nod to calligraphy because it's very difficult to read per se. Like it doesn't look like, our typical sans serif or Arial font, right? But this compared to what Catalyst was showing on the calligraphy slides, you'll notice each of these letters are equally spaced. So what that allowed them to do was to fill a page with more letters, to print them as well. So they would basically lay everything out and print it. And what I find kind of fascinating is the font that's in this. I'll say font because there is a font created for it, is black letter. And we saw that on an earlier page where black letter looked kind of cool when it was one word. I think it was black letter was what you had written in black letter.
Yes, I sure did.
But when you try to read black letter on a page with all these other words, it starts to feel very muddy. So, kudos to those who sat down and actually read the Bible from this. But I think that this also then translated into what we see nowadays with the focus on readability, accessibility, and things like that, and why that's so important. Because even though you could read it, it was difficult. It was very difficult to read.
It was very difficult to read. Black letter was invented primarily as an economic thing. They were what they had, but prior to this was very pretty and very readable, but you couldn't fit as many words on the page. So as people had a desire and as more people were learning to read and as more universities were opening and they had a desire for more texts and more books, black letter was designed specifically so that they could fit more words on a page and make printing cheaper. Yeah. All right, let's go back to this. Woo.
Yeah, so pretty neat. So if you do want to find the font, they did create a font. It's called B42. And you can actually purchase the font. It mimics the way the lettering looks. Not the really cool, like pretty foil lettering that you see pictured on the screen, but all of the other text.
Not to be confused with B52s, which just have a love shack.
Right? Love Shack.
Okay.
Yeah, Bible Shack doesn't have a vibe to
Bible
it.
Shack.
Bible Shack.
Gutenberg,
Yeah.
that sounds scary. A Bible
Bible
Shack
Shack,
sounds
yeah.
scary.
I think I've seen some documentaries on that not going
so
well.
too. I think
So yeah, we're gonna switch. So print's really neat. Very, very cool because it basically lets you scale everything that you're trying to say. So you can communicate your message to a wider audience because you can make more copies, you can distribute it out. But really, it's limited to a certain point, hence where we go into the digital era. So what you're looking at right now is just a brief timeline of the history of serif typefaces. So we'll dive into serif a little bit more, but the whole point that we want to show by this is how you can see kind of this evolution of these older, styles of writing actually all correlate to fonts, to typography that we see nowadays. And when Catalyst and I were going through talking about this episode and things we were going to bring into it, we instantly knew that she's doing calligraphy and I'm doing typography. Like there was no question. It's like I'm the digital, she's analog. We know our lane. Stay in your lane, bro. Okay, so we knew that. But
next time I'm going to do the digital piece.
Okay. I'm holding her to that. You guys heard it here. What timestamp are we at? Can someone clip that she's going to do digital next time? But But what I think was really fascinating as we were talking about kind of each of the things that we were going to bring to this was how much interplay there is between the two. And despite, obviously you can see the connection to their letters, more than that. And me especially, I think I had a lot of aha moments because there's a lot of fonts that I know the name of. I can rattle off the top of my head based off the different types, but I didn't really realize the connection that each of those names actually had to legitimate styles of calligraphy or to a creator of some sort of calligraphic something, like no idea. And I
Mhm.
remember like mentioning one of them and she's like, yeah, that's because of this. I'm like, what are you
Mhm.
talking about? I think it was a minuscule one, minuscule,
Minuscule.
right?
Mhm.
And I'm like, no
Carolingian
way.
minuscule specifically.
All right, yeah, we have to do like a mini break off with that, the Carolingian minuscule, because yeah, it was wild. I had a
Mhm.
moment. I had a
Yeah,
moment.
yeah,
We'll put
there's
it that way.
it's fascinating, and it's fascinating how each of the different fonts, like, if you look at it in this little timeline right here, this mimics exactly and precisely the timeline of calligraphy,
Mhm.
and I think that's fascinating. I mean, it is the timeline
Yeah.
of calligraphy. It's history of serif
Yeah, when
typing.
you think about the different types, like having, you have like Roman,
Mhm.
obviously that makes sense. And you flash forward to
Unical.
uh, exactly, you have
Mhm.
Unical, and then you have like Garmin kind of in the middle, and then it goes to like eventually you end up going to like, I can't read that one, I'm too small.
Baskerville.
Baskerville. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Mhm.
I can read, guys. I promise. I do wear glasses sometimes, though. So,
That's fine.
but what's really fascinating, though, is when you think of those fonts, and if you have a mental image of those fonts, and then you think about the underlying, okay, there was woodblock printing at that time. Well, that makes sense because of like how that's done. And then you start flashing forward to like having the printing press. Okay, well, that makes sense. Like it's just kind of neat to see how you had culture, you had art, and you had technology. All three of those factors have made their impact on what we know as fonts and letters and writing today.
I find that fascinating too, because I didn't like prior to us doing this episode. I mean, I knew that there was a link between fonts, between calligraphy and typography. I didn't realize how deep the rabbit hole went.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
I really did not, and it was fascinating to me. I find it stunning. Speaking of circles,
Right? Typography. Will you be my type? You're just my type.
I need you to be my graphy.
Let's go. Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Oh my goodness. All right. So, typography. This one's cool because typography, if you don't know what typography is, it's like letters. Done. I can just
Mhm.
end my section right now.
Oh, okay.
Um, So, right. So, thank you guys. Here's a picture of letters as your last. No, I'm just kidding. But what was kind of funny to me is if you were watching when Catalyst was talking about calligraphy on, I think it was the faux versus modern, you were showing the differences. Maybe it was on that one. And it had different things that I actually have on mine
Mhm.
with the same words. And I'm like, no way. Calligraphy uses the same words as typography.
I mean, it makes
What?
sense though. It makes sense though. They're not gonna reinvent the wheel, right? Like, they're not gonna come through and reinvent the wheel. Like, when I guess I thought that fonts came from, like, typography and fonts kind of came from a vacuum, but why would they reinvent the wheel? Why would they completely reinvent the way the letters are like the way, all these terminologies and things of that nature? Why would they reinvent all that when they could just use what actually existed and everybody already knew?
Yeah. Yeah, so there's a whole diagram. There's over 30 different attributes that we look at for fonts. We'll go into categorization in just a second, but while we're on here, some of the key ones that I want to make sure we call out are serif, because this should sound super familiar. If you've ever went into any application trying to look for a font, you'll see serif, sans serif, and you're like, this isn't even in English. I don't even know what this means. Serif is just like the little nubs on the letters. It's like
Yeah, it's a little
super
feat.
easy to remember. Yeah, little feet, right? Little
Mhm.
pause. So if serif is just the little end, then sans serif, sans means without. So without feet, without serif. So you couldn't have sans serif, which is a very popular type font nowadays, especially in like digital, right? Websites and things like that. You literally couldn't have sans serif without serif. And some of the other things to pay attention to are like X height, that's used a whole lot. So that's how high you see that middle line that is being highlighted. So if you see a font that looks like very, very tall and super narrow, it's a very high X height. Where you think about like the line across the A is very high up. That's what that would mean. Things below the line, the descender. I remember us talking about when we were creating the Art and Inquiry logo. And if you think about the word art and inquiry, you have inquiry, which has a Q,
And a
and a
Y.
Y.
Hmm.
Both of those are descenders. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. When we got to the point where we were picking fonts, there
Hmm.
was a moment I thought to myself, this could be a deal breaker for Catalyst and I being friends. Because if she's into some really weird descenders, like it's not my vibe. It's just not my vibe, you know?
Literally.
Like,
Thankfully, we actually we actually had the same vibes on that because
yeah.
I felt the same way because it was we when we were going through and doing that logo, like I was like, okay, I really hope that Mello doesn't like, you know, the like you know what I mean? Like I like this, you know what I mean? Like this G, I love that. I think that's beautiful.
See, and I knew that she would want it all like fancy, right? Because she's into calligraphy. And then here I am, everything is digital. So I
Mhm.
really like clean lines, but I do appreciate when things are kind of like a throwback.
Mhm.
Hence why I love ampersands. Like those are so cool.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and
yeah.
I've always
So,
loved ampersands. Ampersands at thebomb.com.
oh yeah.
Oh, I just said
So yeah,
thebomb.com. That's that's delightful.
it's not a website. Don't go to it. Do not go to our website.
Start it
Don't
dash
go
inquiry.
to, right? Art dash inquiry, art inc. All right. So that whole slide that you saw before with all of those different attributes, it's kind of hard to take that and understand, okay, well, how does this help me? And what you're seeing now, this is Vox's proposal on how we can better bucket and understand the different types of fonts. So there's this really cool guy, awesome name, Maximilian Vox. Catalyst and I have both requested our names to be changed to this.
Yeah, I
It's
really
going to
want
be really weird though, because it's
I
like Max and Max, or we have to figure out what our new intro will be because it's like, hi, I'm Max.
I just
Hi,
want the
I'm
box part. I just want the
Maximilian.
box part.
You just want Vox?
Yeah, for
Okay.
the box.
Okay. I'm here for that. Then
Yeah,
I'll be a milli,
yeah.
Vox a millionaire. Yeah.
Nice.
So
Nice.
what you're what you're looking at here is just the breakdown of some of those attributes and then how they're bucketed. So you'll notice some of these words will look super familiar if you've scrolled through your fonts before, seeing things like Garamond and see like scripts. So you have manual, script, humanistic, see all these ones on the outside. And then as you get closer, then it kind of gets detailed with some examples of the fonts and then breaks them down into classical and modern. There are a few renditions of this though. Adobe has a really cool simplified version of this too. But the key is when you're thinking of like, okay, I need to find a font for this. If you can just figure out a few of the attributes, you can then not have to scroll through 500 fonts. And you're
Hmm.
like, okay, do I want feet on it? Yes or no? All right. So I want feet on it. I want it to be serif. Got it. And then you're going to go from there. So that's why a lot of times, like if you're working with someone on like something with design, and it comes down to what font are we going to use? The type of questions you'll tend to be asked is well, like what kind of vibe are you going through? What kind of style are you looking for? What do you want someone to
What are you
see
trying
and
to
feel?
say? Yeah.
Yeah, when they look at your logo or whatever you're
Right.
designing, because
Sure.
those fonts change it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think a good example is just like if we pick some random companies, right, and we look at their logos. We've pulled in the different types of fonts, the main ones being serif, sans serif, script, monospaced, and display. So I'm hoping all those words sound familiar. If they don't, you're now going to be an expert just because of this one slide alone. And then you can hopefully win Jeopardy one day and remember that you heard it here. I'm Melanie. This is our inquiry. So, but we have serif. So
Mhm.
serif again, feet. We got the feet, right?
Mhm.
So if you think of serif, Tiffany and Co. So when I think of serif, I think of anything that wants to feel like it's a throw to vintage or like classic, but it's
Expensive,
not like too
expensive,
crazy, but money.
timeless.
Yeah, exactly. Timeless, all of those type of things.
Take it
And
seriously.
then take it seriously. They're not
Mhm.
here to play. Like they're
Mhm.
none of that bouncy kind of stuff. Like
No.
they are to the book.
Yeah.
And I think like an easy one is Times New Roman.
Mhm.
Everybody knows Times New Roman.
Sure do.
And it's classic. It's classic for a reason. Then we have sans serif. So this is where you see a lot of this now, especially on websites. So sans serif tends to be, I guess, more web safe. I'm not saying that's why, but it is one of like the top types of fonts that are available on web and email, which is actually hard to find. Those two lists only overlap for 5 fonts, by the way. But we have like
Wow.
Arial, yeah, Helvetica, Calibri, like that kind of stuff. So
Hmm.
Helvetica is hands down probably one of the most popular ones that
Hmm.
people use in designs. And the reason being is it's neutral. The joke is like it's net neutral because you can use it online. But
There's also
essentially,
55 bazillion thousand bazillion weights, cases, and styles of Helvetica.
yes.
Ugh.
Yeah. So, like, I can use Helvetica and you can use it, and yours can actually look totally different than mine, even though it's the same base font, because
Mhm.
I'm doing bold display, all this crazy stuff. You're doing italic, narrow, condensed, all of that.
Mhm.
So, sans serif's a popular one. So, you'll see some of those with like the Airbnb, Spotify. When I think of this, I think of like a company or a brand or someone who's trying to be just more in the now, like more fun, approachable, welcoming, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
Script, not to be confused with the serif part, but script is meant to look like it was done by hand, but it's in no way like calligraphy by any
Mhm.
means. But it does look like it has like the swoops and the loops and the
It's inspired by
folds.
calligraphy.
Inspired by, right?
Mhm.
Calligraphic.
It's calligraphic.
Calligraphic, that's the word? Yes. See, I
It's
learned a new
calligraphic.
word. I learned a new word.
It is.
Calligraphic.
I think I made that word up though. So
No,
just as
now I
FYI.
see it everywhere.
Oh,
I
okay.
know. No,
Sorry.
it's literally it's on the interweb. If it's on the internet, I mean,
Oh,
it's a
that's true.
fact.
Just because I put it there doesn't mean it's not there.
Right? It's not like we have to print a book anymore. I mean, we're in the
Literally.
digital age. Did you not watch the rest of this episode?
I
Like, we're
did.
here now.
Yeah.
Then we have monospaced.
Mhm.
So monospaced it's kind of similar to sans serif. However, you'll notice there's typically spacing in between each of them. So it's almost like a throw to actually like the press concept where each space is uniform between each of the letters. So when I think of this, I think of Courier, which is not pictured here.
Mhm.
But if you have seen that font or have used it before, you'll know exactly what I mean. But a
Mhm.
good example of a logo of it is Urban Outfitters. It's actually kind of harder to find a monospaced logo because the ones that do tend to like have bigger spaces or things like that end up being a display font, which is our last one.
Mhm.
So display fonts, these are really meant to be just big, bold in your face and used as a title. If you try to write a book and publish it in display font, it'd be hard to read, almost like the way it was hard on like black letter to read the whole page because it's meant to be like for a big statement, a headline, that type of thing. So Sega is the example that we have here. If I tried to write,
Sega.
yeah, if I tried to write a paragraph in Sega font,
Oh, wow. Oof. They also,
uh,
it does, one thing with display fonts that I kind of want, they tend to go dated quicker. A lot with a lot of these things, like, so these like Times New Roman, Coca-Cola, Netflix, Urban Outfitters, Airbnb, Spotify, Tiffany's, etc. These are going to be more timeless for longer because they're simpler.
and I find it just, I guess it's ironic with Sega because Sega was trying to be futuristic
Hmm.
when they introduced this logo, right? Back in the
Sorry.
day. We look at it now and we're like, oof,
That's giving 70s. That's giving
yeah,
basement. That's giving 80s, like windbreaker, like velour is
yep.
what that's giving. Yeah.
What's interesting is the letter shapes are very similar to like the NASAization. Wow, I can talk today.
Yes.
NASAization font, which is meant to look like NASA, like that space kind of writing. So that is this type of font-ish. But to make this display, that's why you're seeing with the double lines, and you could technically argue it was a boldface with a line cut in it. But hey,
Yeah.
apple to apple.
Dust to dust.
What the font?
What the font? All right, so now it's your turn.
You with the font.
You with the pen, with the brush, with the ink, with the quill.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Do any kind of thing you can think of. So we've talked about today calligraphy.
Hmm.
We've talked about lettering. What else am I missing? Because I feel like I should use like 5 hands and I picked two things.
Right, right. Typesetting, the evolution, the evolution,
Typesetting.
the evolution of writing, the evolution of the
Yeah.
written word, and how it's changed. We've talked about a lot of things, actually. We covered a lot.
Yeah. So with that though, our theme, be bold. All right.
Oh,
So think about it could be a word, it could be a song lyric, it could be a name. Use that as your muse and write it down if it's digital, if it's on paper with some really cool nib and other
calligraphic.
calligraphic tools. Use any of the methods that we've talked about
Mhm.
to convey the meaning of what that word is visually. When you think about letters as an art form versus just the words, like just what the actual word means, how can you amplify the message of what you're trying to say by the choice of the font, by how you treat the letters, all of that?
How are you going to convey your meaning, the meaning of just a few simple words visually? How are you going to do that?
Exactly.
So, find a quote you love, find a song lyric you love, find, or maybe you want to write like a love letter to someone. It is Valentine's Day after all.
Hey.
Yeah. So yeah, and then do your post to using the hashtag #ArtInkMe and tag art and inquiry. That's art me and tag art and inquiry, and we will be sure to make sure that your posts get featured on our social media. And a little tiny bit of inspo just to wet your whistle because we've talked
Ooh.
a lot about black letter. And one of the things I love about Blackletter is that it's come such a long way. It's come from the Bible. It's come from monks and tiny little script that you find it very hard to read, and it's come into the future. It's come well into the future, and you're gonna see that in graffiti. You're gonna see that in tattoos. You're gonna see that in modern calligraphy as well, but it is like an ancient form of writing. So here's just a tiny little bit of bold inspiration for you. I think that's about the size of it.
Right? I mean, it's just a little taste. Just a little
Just a little
taste. A
taste.
few words about letters.
A
And this
few
is
letters about words.
ooh, that was deep. That was deep.
And
Well, with that, I'm Mellow.
I'm Kat. And this was Art and Inquiry.